The 1970s are often hailed as one of the greatest decades in film history, particularly in America. Inspired by the international new waves of the 50s and 60s, a group of American filmmakers began innovating like never before, merging artistic integrity with mainstream appeal. The Godfather, Taxi Driver, Jaws, The Sting. In that era, if a film had style and substance, it sold. A feat only a handful of indie films manage to pull off today. Modern cinema is deeply divided. On one side, auteur-driven films from A24 and Neon. On the other, Marvel and DC blockbusters raking in billions. But in the 70s, there was a brief window when the gap didn't exist. Among the celebrated movie brats behind this movement, Coppola, Scorsese, Spielberg, De Palma, there's one name too often left out of the conversation: William Friedkin. Friedkin shocked audiences with The Exorcist and won over critics with The French Connection. Both were massive hits, critical and commercial triumphs. And yet, after these two monumental successes, Friedkin never quite regained the same box office dominance. Perhaps this was because Friedkin's protagonists weren't lovable rogues or tragic visionaries. They were violent men driven by obsession, cruelty, and survival. As Greg Quick writes for Flood, Friedkin's great inexhaustible theme was men, the unfettered essence and innate violence of men, thrashing like a captured shark down deep in their heart. Cops, killers, creeps, and priests. Characters we root for not because they're good, but because they're not quite as bad as the other guys. In The French Connection, Gene Hackman's Popeye Doyle is a brutal, sadistic cop whose badge justifies his impulses. In The Exorcist, we meet a priest tormented by guilt over his mother's death, haunted not just by demons, but by the failure of his own faith. That film may be known for its horrors, but it ends with an act of sacrifice and redemption. It's Friedkin's most hopeful ending. Audiences and critics sadly grew tired of Friedkin's intensity. His later films were often met with indifference, scorn, or worse, silence. Yet for those who kept watching, it became clear Friedkin was only getting started. Some of his best work came after the 70s, which we'll be exploring today. In the late 70s, Friedkin set out to remake The Wages of Fear, a beloved French classic by Henri-Georges Clouzot. The result, Sorcerer, a brutal, nerve-shredding thriller that may just be Friedkin's greatest achievement. Sadly, it was released just weeks after Star Wars. Audiences weren't ready for a slow burn descent into existential dread. But in recent years, thanks in part to critics like Mark Kermode, Sorcerer has undergone a major reappraisal. It's now recognized as a terrifying meditation on fate, guilt, and masculine desperation. The story follows four outcasts: a hitman, a terrorist, a corrupt banker, and a gangster, tasked with transporting volatile nitroglycerin through the jungles of South America. Roy Scheider leads a cast of morally bankrupt men on what amounts to a suicide mission. Friedkin's documentary sensibilities shine here. The film's infamous bridge sequence, in which a truck teeters over a collapsing rope bridge in a torrential downpour, is among the most gripping action scenes ever committed to film. As Christina Newland writes for the BBC, Sorcerer maintained the courage of its artistic convictions, the antithesis of what we see in so much Hollywood cinema today, a shining example of a fork in the road of American film. If Sorcerer was a misunderstood classic, Cruising was a full-blown cinematic controversy. Starring Al Pacino as a cop infiltrating New York's underground S&M clubs to investigate a string of grisly murders, Cruising was protested from nearly every angle. In particular, LGBTQ+ groups feared it would inflame anti-gay sentiment, and they relentlessly protested the film's production. Shot with raw, almost documentary-like realism, Friedkin cast actual members of the leather scene, The film's oppressive atmosphere is unlike anything else from the era. The MPAA forced Friedkin to cut down explicit scenes, and the resulting film feels haunted, unsettling, even incomplete. Much of the film's construction was discovered by the director in the edit, enraging the film's star. Pacino gives a slow burn performance as a man disoriented by the world he's entered. And Friedkin, who had unparalleled access to law enforcement due to the French Connection, grounds the procedural elements in an eerie realism. Like many of Friedkin's films, Cruising asks far more than it answers. It's not about sexuality, it's about identity, repression, and the masks men wear in a violent, unknowable world. By the mid-'80s, Friedkin was written off by many as an auteur of the past, and then came to live and die in LA. This slick, stylish crime thriller became something of a cult favorite. The film features intense performances from William Peterson of Manhunt fame and Willem Dafoe as a twisted villain. Although Friedkin directed many car chases, his sequence across LA in this film truly rivals his work in The French Connection. It's the closest Friedkin ever got to reclaiming his mainstream popularity. Rampage is one of Friedkin's least viewed and most disturbing films. Loosely based on the real-life vampire killer of Sacramento, Rampage follows a district attorney, Michael Bain, pushing for the death penalty against a bloodthirsty serial killer until he begins to question everything. The film was shelved for 5 years before being re-edited and released by Miramax in 1999. Tragically, both versions exist, but neither has seen a wide release. Rampage confronts the death penalty in a way few films dare, spurred on by Friedkin's complicated, evolving feelings regarding the issue. Friedkin puts us inside the killer's mind, and then deeper still into the doubts and moral contradictions of those tasked with delivering justice. The result is a taut, haunting courtroom thriller that deserves far more attention. In the 90s, erotic thrillers were everywhere, just ask Karina Longworth. Basic Instinct, Body of Evidence, etc. So Friedkin dove into the genre with Jade, written by Joe Esterhaus. In Jade, David Caruso plays a district attorney who stumbles across a female killer who uses sex to murder her victims. But things are complicated when it's revealed that the suspected killer, played by Linda Fiorentino, is an old lover of Caruso's character. Critics hated Jade due to its overcooked plot and clunky dialogue, but Friedkin directs the hell out of the neo-noir. The film's car chase through the tight alleyways of San Francisco is another masterclass in tension and raw spectacle. While Friedkin doesn't seem particularly interested in the film's eroticism, Jade is soaked in noir atmosphere, and its critique of the elite, its corruption, its perversion, calls back to giallo films and even Chinatown. Across the slew of terrible erotic thrillers in the 90s, Jade stands out, if mostly for its Friedkin direction. A soldier played by Benicio del Toro has snapped in the Oregon wilderness. To stop del Toro's visceral murders, his mentor, played by Tommy Lee Jones, a tracker who once trained him to kill, is brought in to bring del Toro down. Despite featuring a rather simple plot, beneath the Hunted's simplicity lies an aching yet animalistic study of masculine violence and the psychological costs of war. Casting is considered 70 to 90% of a director's role, and Friedkin outdoes himself by casting Tommy Lee Jones and Benicio del Toro. Both simmering dramatic actors, Friedkin pulls tremendous physical performances from these two. Robert Jordan Hunt, writing for Collider, says, Jones and del Toro are both commanding as teacher and student turned enemies. Del Toro can bring some of the best crazy eyes in the business and is completely believable as the stone-cold, knife-wielding assassin. As for Tommy Lee Jones, the actor is simply one of the most watchable performers and is nothing but present and totally honest. Each time the two are on screen together, Friedkin keeps the tension high and the dialogue at a minimum, instead forcing the actors to rely on their physicality to tell their roles. Critics compared The Hunted to First Blood as a way to write off the thriller, yet The Hunted is meditative and brutal. yet almost Shakespearean in its pathos. Friedkin strips the story down to its bones, then lets the actors carry the weight. Although it took several years for his next film to be greenlit, Friedkin followed The Hunted up with another instant classic, the skin-crawling horror thriller Bug, starring Michael Shannon as a deranged veteran who convinces his lover, played by Ashley Judd, that bugs have infested their motel. Based off a hit play, Bug continues the themes of The Hunted and many of Friedkin's previous films, exploring the trauma and psychological destruction of the American people. Steven Saito interviewed Friedkin, and in his article he writes, "At the time of this interview, it might have seemed like the end of an era for Friedkin. The Hunted, a ferociously entertaining survival thriller, was his last studio film, and his deal at Paramount had expired around the same time his wife, Sherry Lansing, would leave her post at the top of the studio. But it can be seen clearly now as the start of a creative renaissance that would not only involve moving towards the independent space to make films, but dabbling in documentaries as he did starting out and directing for the stage, both theater and opera, and although a tonal tightrope act like Bug may only work because of the skill that Friedkin had built up over decades in the industry, it is the kind of film that usually only someone starting out might have the audacity to make, thinking they have nothing to lose." Despite not featuring car chases or high-wire stunts and effects, Bug allowed Friedkin to work closely with tremendously talented actors and elevate their performances with his intense focus. In the same interview, Friedkin says of the Bug production, "All throughout, I was amazed at how the material played, how well these people played it, and how much they brought to it completely on their own. At a certain point, I began to feel like a ringmaster at a circus who just brings all of the acts together, and you wonder how these acts are going to gel because they're all so different. And that was true of the cast. They're all different sorts of people, and then to put them together and see them take off on their own with what their feelings were about these characters was a marvelous experience. It's what a director dreams about and lives for, where you can just set the objects in motion and they stay up there with a kind of gravitational pull. And you don't have to keep molding it or pushing it or shoving it around." William Friedkin wasn't interested in making you comfortable. He confronted, never softening his films to appeal to audiences no matter the cost. He just kept making the kinds of films that fascinated him, tense, morally ambiguous, deeply felt portraits of men and people in crisis. He may never have become a brand name the same level as Spielberg or Scorsese, but this sets his career apart. And for that, he deserves to be remembered not just as one of the greats of the 70s, but as one of the greatest American filmmakers ever. William Friedkin passed away in 2023 at the age of 87. Despite his age, Friedkin made films until the very end. An invaluable book to understand the man is The Friedkin Connection, an autobiographical book Friedkin penned in 2013. In its beautiful conclusion, Friedkin talks of how his love of art, his work, was never done. Musing, "Just when you learn how to do it, you're too old, except in your dreams. Lately, I've been remaking my movies, reshooting scenes in greater detail than I did originally. Several times in the middle of the night, I awake and think, well, that was a dream, and it's over. Then I fall back to sleep, but the work continues. At this rate, I'll be shooting forever. The scenes aren't from one film, they're from many, but somehow they seem to connect, to make dreams sense. I'm relaxed and in control. No anxiety, no sense of dread. I haven't made my Citizen Kane, but there's more work to do. I don't know how much I'm loving it. Perhaps I'll fail again. Maybe next time I'll fail better."